Tony Bennett sat in his favorite armchair, staring at the leather-bound journal that Susan had just placed in his trembling hands. The morning sun streamed through their Central Park West apartment, but Tony felt as if he was sitting in shadows, watching his own life slip away one memory at a time. The Alzheimer's diagnosis had been devastating enough, but watching his mind betray him daily was unbearable. "What is this, Susan?" Tony asked, running his weathered fingers over the smooth brown leather cover. Susan settled into the chair beside him, her eyes bright with tears she had been holding back for months. "It's something I've been writing for you, Tony. Every single day for the past 5 years. Everything you did, everyone you met, every conversation we had. I knew this day would come when you would need help remembering, so I wrote it all down." Tony opened the cover and saw Susan's careful handwriting filling page after page. The first entry was dated January 1st, 2019. January the 1st, 2019. Tony woke up this morning and couldn't remember where he put his reading glasses. When I found them on his head, he laughed and said, "Susan, I think I'm getting old. If only we had known then what we know now." But today was also beautiful. Tony spent 2 hours at the piano playing songs for me that he claimed he had never performed before. When I asked him where he learned them, he said they just came to him, as if someone was whispering melodies in his ear. Tony looked up at Susan. "I don't remember any of this." "Keep reading," Susan said gently. "There are things in there that even you didn't know you had forgotten." Tony turned the page, and what he read made his blood run cold. January 15th, 2019. Something strange happened today. Tony received a phone call from someone claiming to be his half-sister. A woman named Maria Santos called from Los Angeles, saying that she had been trying to reach Tony for 30 years, but never had the courage until now. She said their father, John Benedetto, had an affair in 1943, and that she was the result. Tony was so shaken by the call that he couldn't speak for an hour afterward. When I asked him if he wanted to call her back, he just stared out the window and whispered, "I always wondered why my father was so sad during the war years." Tony's hands began to shake. "Susan, I don't remember this phone call. I don't remember anyone named Maria Santos." "Keep reading, Tony. It gets more complicated." The next entry was even more shocking. January 22nd, 2019. Tony decided to call Maria Santos back. They spoke for 3 hours. It turns out that Maria has been following Tony's career her entire life, not just as a fan, but as a sister who was never acknowledged. She told Tony that their father visited her and her mother every month until he died, providing financial support, but making them promise never to contact Tony or his family. Maria has been living with this secret for 76 years. When Tony asked her why she was calling now, she said she had been diagnosed with terminal cancer and needed to know that someone in her family knew she existed before she died. Tony closed the journal and looked at Susan with confusion and pain. "Why don't I remember any of this? How could I forget having a sister?" "The doctors said that emotional trauma can accelerate memory loss in Alzheimer's patients," Susan explained gently. "Learning about Maria was so overwhelming for you that your mind seems to have blocked out the entire experience. But it didn't end with that phone call, Tony. Keep reading." With growing trepidation, Tony turned to the next entry. February 3rd, 2019. Tony flew to Los Angeles to meet Maria. I went with him, afraid of how he might react to seeing his half-sister for the first time. Maria looks remarkably like Tony's mother, Anna, which explains why their father fell in love with her mother during the war. Maria has Tony's eyes and his hands, the same long, elegant fingers that have graced piano keys for decades. But the most shocking thing was what Maria showed us. a collection of letters that their father wrote to her mother, documenting his love affair and his guilt about betraying his family. In one letter, dated 1944, John Benedetto wrote, "I love both my families, but I can never give either of them the complete truth. Tony will grow up thinking I'm a faithful husband, and Maria will grow up knowing I'm a man who abandoned her. I don't know which lie is worse." Tony felt tears streaming down his face. "Susan, are you telling me I have a sister who's dying, and I can't even remember meeting her?" "There's more, Tony. Much more." The next entry revealed an even deeper mystery. February 10th, 2019. Maria shared something with Tony that changed everything we thought we knew about his family. She had been researching their father's war service and discovered that John Benedetto wasn't just a simple soldier during World War II. He had been recruited by the Office of Strategic Services, the predecessor to the CIA, because of his ability to speak multiple languages and his connections in the Italian-American community. Maria showed us classified documents that she had obtained through a Freedom of Information Act request. Tony's father had been a spy, working undercover in Italian communities across America to identify potential security threats and Nazi sympathizers. His affair with Maria's mother wasn't an affair at all. It was a cover story for his intelligence work. Tony's world tilted. Everything he thought he knew about his father was wrong. March 1st, 2019. The revelations about Tony's father's secret life led to more discoveries. Maria had found evidence that John Benedetto had been involved in protecting Italian-American entertainers who were being investigated for alleged mob connections during the 1940s and 50s. Tony's early career success wasn't just talent and luck. His father had been quietly clearing the way for him, using his intelligence contacts to make sure that Tony never became entangled in the investigations that destroyed other performers' careers. Every club booking, every recording contract, every career milestone had been facilitated by a father who was protecting his son from shadows that Tony never even knew existed. Tony stared at the journal, trying to process the implications. My father was protecting me from the mob. "Keep reading," Susan said. "It gets even more complex." March 15th, 2019. Tony received another shock today when Maria introduced him to his nephew, Maria's son, David Santos. David is 45 years old and has been working as a music producer in Los Angeles for the past 20 years. He has produced albums for some of the biggest names in the industry, and it turns out that he has been secretly ensuring that Tony's music gets included in movie soundtracks and television shows. David has been protecting Tony's as legacy and income without Tony ever knowing they were related. When I asked David why he had done this anonymously, he said, "Uncle Tony never knew I existed, but his music raised me. The least I could do was make sure his music would outlive us all." Tony looked up at Susan with amazement. "I have a nephew who's been helping my career without me knowing?" "You have a nephew who loves you deeply," Susan confirmed. But that's not the end of the story. The entries continued to reveal layer after layer of family secrets. April 2nd, 2019. David Santos brought Tony something that no one expected: recordings of their father that had been made by the OSS during his intelligence work. These weren't official debriefings, they were personal audio diaries that John Benedetto had been required to keep as part of his psychological evaluation. Hearing his father's voice again after 60 years was overwhelming for Tony. But what his father said in these recordings was even more shocking. John Benedetto had been documenting not just his intelligence work, but his fears about how his secret life was affecting his family. In one recording from 1955, he said, "Anthony is becoming a great performer, but he doesn't understand the dangers that success can bring. I've seen too many talented people destroyed by forces they never saw coming. I'm trying to build shields around him. But I can't tell him what I'm protecting him from without destroying his innocence and his art. Tony was overwhelmed by the complexity of his father's love and sacrifice. April 20th, 2019. The most shocking revelation came when Maria shared her mother's deathbed confession. Tony's father hadn't just been protecting him from mob investigations, he had been protecting him from a much more personal threat. Tony's biological mother, Anna, hadn't died of pneumonia as everyone believed. She had been murdered by someone who wanted to hurt John Benedetto's intelligence work. Tony's father had spent the rest of his life hunting for his wife's killer, while simultaneously protecting Tony from ever learning the truth. The official story about Anna's death had been a cover-up designed to protect a 10-year-old boy from the knowledge that his mother had been murdered because of his father's secret service to his country. Tony dropped the journal, his hands shaking uncontrollably. "My mother was murdered." Susan took his hands in hers. "Tony, I need you to understand something. You learned all of this information over the course of several months. Each revelation was processed slowly, with time to absorb and understand. But as your memory began to fade, you forgot these discoveries. The trauma of learning about your family's secrets, combined with your advancing Alzheimer's, created a kind of protective amnesia. But why are you telling me now? Why are you making me relive this?" "Because Maria is dying, Tony. She has maybe 2 weeks left and she wants to see you one more time, but I needed you to understand why she's important to you, even if you can't remember the details of your relationship." Tony picked up the journal again, his heart pounding. May 10th, 2019. Tony and Maria spent today looking through old photographs and documents that revealed the full scope of their father's double life. John Benedetto had maintained detailed records of his intelligence work, including photographs of Nazi sympathizers he had identified, reports on mob activities in entertainment venues, and most heartbreakingly, his investigation into Anna's murder. It turns out that Anna had accidentally witnessed a meeting between Nazi agents and Italian-American collaborators in 1936. She had been killed not because of John's work, but because she had stumbled onto information that could have exposed a German spy ring operating in New York. John spent the next 20 years tracking down everyone involved in his wife's murder. By 1956, he had identified and helped prosecute the last of Anna's killers. The revelations continued, each one more stunning than the last. June 1st, 2019. Tony learned today that his entire musical career had been shaped by his father's intelligence connections. Every major venue where Tony performed in the 1950s and 60s had been cleared by federal agents to ensure Tony's safety. Every recording studio, every television appearance, every major performance had been preceded by security sweeps and background checks on everyone involved. Tony's artistic choices were his own, but his father had been creating a protective bubble around him that ensured he could focus on his music without worrying about the dangers that had destroyed his mother. June 15th, 2019. The most emotional discovery was a letter that John Benedetto had written to Tony, but never sent. The letter was found in Maria's mother's belongings after her death. In it, John explained everything: his intelligence work, Anna's murder, his relationship with Maria's mother, and his lifelong mission to protect Tony while seeking justice for Anna. The letter ended with these words: "Son, if you ever read this, know that every choice I made was designed to give you the freedom to become the artist you were meant to be. Your mother's death nearly destroyed me, but watching you bring joy to the world through your music has been my salvation. I hope someday you can forgive the lies I told to protect the truth of how much I love you." Tony was sobbing now, overwhelmed by the magnitude of his father's sacrifice and love. July 4th, 2019. Tony decided to honor his father's memory and his mother's life by creating a special concert dedicated to the truth. Working with David Santos, he organized a private performance for Maria and a small group of family members and friends. Tony sang songs that his mother had loved, songs that his father had hummed while working in their garden, and songs that represented the complex legacy of love, loss, and protection that had shaped his life. During the performance, Tony spoke publicly for the first time about his father's secret service to his country and his mother's tragic death. It was the most honest and emotional performance of Tony's career. But the journal's revelations weren't finished. August 12th, 2019, Maria shared one final secret that changed everything Tony thought he understood about his own identity. Through her research into their father's intelligence work, she had discovered that Tony Bennett wasn't just a stage name. It was an identity created by federal agents to protect Anthony Benedetto from potential retaliation by Nazi sympathizers and mob figures who might target him because of his father's work and his mother's murder. The young man who had started performing in New York clubs in the 1940s had been given a new identity as part of a witness protection program that he never knew existed. Tony Bennett was literally a federal creation, designed to allow Anthony Benedetto to live and perform safely. Tony stared at the page in disbelief. "I'm not even who I think I am." "You're exactly who you've always been," Susan assured him. "You're just learning about the lengths people went to protect you so you could become who you were meant to be." The final entries in the journal documented Tony's gradual acceptance of these revelations and his growing relationship with the family he had never known existed. September 30th, 2019. Tony has spent the last month getting to know Maria and David as family members rather than strangers. The bond between them has been remarkable to witness. Maria has Tony's sense of humor and his gift for storytelling. David has inherited the family's musical intuition and has been helping Tony arrange new versions of classic songs. Watching them together, you can see the genetic connections that transcend the years of separation. November 11th, 2019. On Veterans Day, Tony held a private ceremony to honor his father's service, both his official military service and his classified intelligence work. Maria, David, and several other family members attended, along with representatives from the CIA who finally acknowledged John Benedetto's contributions to national security. Tony performed God Bless America at the ceremony, but he dedicated it not just to his country, but to his father's memory and to his mother's sacrifice. As Tony read the final entry in the journal, he understood why Susan had waited until now to share these memories with him. December 31st, 2019. Tony's memory problems are becoming more pronounced, but his connection to his newfound family has given him strength and purpose. Maria's health is declining, but she says that knowing Tony has brought peace to her final months. David has asked Tony to record an album of family songs, lullabies that their grandfather sang, folk songs from their Italian heritage, and original compositions that tell the story of their complex family history. Tony has agreed, saying that he wants to create something that will preserve these newly discovered family memories, even after his own memory is gone. Tony closed the journal and looked at Susan with profound gratitude. "How much of this do I still remember?" "Pieces," Susan said softly. "Some days you remember Maria clearly. Some days you remember David, but the emotional connections remain even when the factual memories fade. You still light up when you hear their voices on the phone. You still ask me to play the album you recorded with David. The love is still there, even when the details are lost." Tony understood now why Susan had preserved these memories so carefully. The journal wasn't just a record of what had happened. It was a bridge between the person he had been and the person he was becoming as his memory faded. "Can we call Maria?" Tony asked. "I want to hear her voice, even if I can't remember why she's important." Susan smiled through her tears. "She's actually coming to visit tomorrow. She wanted to surprise you, but I think you should be prepared to meet your sister, even if it feels like meeting her for the first time." The next morning, when Maria Santos walked into Tony's apartment, he didn't recognize her face, but something deep in his soul responded to her presence. When she spoke, her voice carried echoes of his mother's cadence. When she laughed, it sounded like music from his childhood. And when she hugged him, he felt a connection that transcended memory, the recognition that some bonds are written in blood and music and love, and that those bonds survive even when everything else is forgotten. Susan continued to write in the memory book every day, documenting Tony's interactions with the family he kept meeting for the first time, preserving the evidence of love that persisted beyond the reach of Alzheimer's. The journal became a testament, not just to what Tony had forgotten, but to what could never be taken away from him. The knowledge that he was deeply loved by people who had spent lifetimes protecting, supporting, and celebrating him from the shadows. In the final months before his death, Tony would often ask Susan to read from the memory book, not because he understood all the details, but because the stories made him feel connected to something larger than his fading consciousness. The journal had become proof that his life had mattered in ways he had never imagined, that his music had been more than entertainment. It had been the fulfillment of his father's dreams, the vindication of his mother's sacrifice, and the foundation for a family legacy that would continue long after the last note was sung. The memory book remained with Susan after Tony's death, a record of the hidden stories that had shaped one of America's most beloved performers. But more than that, it was evidence that love finds ways to transcend time, memory, and even death itself, and that the most important stories are often the ones we never know we're living until someone who loves us takes the time to write them down. But there were pages in Susan's memory book that she had never shown Tony, entries too shocking and too complex for his fragmented mind to process. These were the discoveries that had emerged in the final years, revelations that completed the puzzle of Tony's extraordinary life. January 15th, 2020. I received a call today from Professor Elena Rodriguez at Columbia University. She has been researching Tony's father's intelligence work and discovered something that changes everything we thought we knew about the Bennett family's role in American history. Professor Rodriguez found evidence that John Benedetto wasn't just a low-level intelligence agent. He was one of the architects of Operation Paperclip, the secret program that brought Nazi scientists to America after World War II. John had been responsible for determining which German immigrants posed security threats and which could be safely relocated to American research facilities. February 3rd, 2020, Professor Rodriguez shared classified documents that revealed the true scope of John Benedetto's influence. He had been involved in interrogating German rocket scientists, evaluating Italian nuclear physicists, and even interviewing captured Nazi officials at Nuremberg. Tony's father had been present at some of the most important moments in post-war intelligence gathering. But more shocking was the discovery that Anna's murder had been ordered by a Nazi war criminal who John had helped convict. Anna's death wasn't random. It was targeted revenge against a man who had played a crucial role in bringing war criminals to justice. February 20th, 2020. The revelations about John Benedetto's war work led to another discovery that took my breath away. Maria Santos contacted me with information from her mother's papers that she had been afraid to share earlier. Tony's mother, Anna, hadn't just witnessed a Nazi meeting by accident. She had been working with John's intelligence unit as an informant, using her connections in the Italian-American community to gather information about potential collaborators. Anna Benedetto had been a spy, just like her husband. Her murder wasn't the result of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. It was the assassination of an active intelligence agent. March 10th, 2020. Today, I learned something that broke my heart. Tony's childhood memories of his mother being distant and preoccupied weren't because she didn't love him. They were because she was living a double life as an intelligence operative. The loving, attentive mother that Tony remembered from his early childhood was real. But by the time he was 7, Anna had been recruited by federal agents to help identify Nazi sympathizers in New York's Italian community. The woman Tony mourned as a simple housewife had actually been one of the most effective female intelligence agents of World War II. April 1st, 2020. David Santos brought me a box of documents that his grandmother had hidden for 80 years. Inside were commendation letters from J. Edgar Hoover himself, praising Anna Benedetto's exceptional service to national security and her unwavering courage in the face of extreme personal danger. Anna had been operating undercover in Nazi social clubs, attending meetings disguised as a sympathizer, and reporting back on plans for sabotage and espionage. The FBI had considered her one of their most valuable assets in the fight against domestic Nazi activity. April 25th, 2020. The most shocking discovery came when Professor Rodriguez found Anna's actual intelligence files. Tony's mother had been recruited not just because of her Italian connections, but because she had been a professional jazz pianist before marriage, a career that John had asked her to give up when it became too dangerous to maintain her cover. Anna's musical performances in nightclubs had been her cover story for meeting with Nazi contacts. Every song she sang, every club where she performed, had been part of an elaborate intelligence operation. Tony had inherited his musical gifts from a mother who had used those same gifts to serve her country. May 12th, 2020. David brought me recordings that the FBI had made of Anna's performances in Nazi social clubs. Hearing Tony's mother singing German folk songs to crowds of American Nazi sympathizers, all while secretly gathering intelligence about their activities, was surreal and heartbreaking. Her voice was beautiful, but you could hear the tension and fear underneath the melody. She was literally singing for her life, knowing that discovery would mean certain death. June 1st, 2020. Professor Rodriguez discovered why Anna's murder had been so brutal. German intelligence had figured out she was an American agent and decided to make an example of her. Anna had been tortured for information before being killed, but according to FBI records, she never revealed other agents or ongoing operations. She died protecting her family and dozens of other intelligence assets. July 4th, 2020. On Independence Day, I finally understood Tony's family legacy. Both parents had risked everything to serve their country. They had sacrificed their marriage, careers, safety, and ultimately Anna's life for American freedom. Tony's entire career had been built on their heroism, protected by the same agencies his parents served. August 15th, 2020. I decided never to tell Tony about the full extent of his parents' war service. His memory was fading rapidly, and I couldn't bear him losing these revelations as quickly as he learned them. But I shared the information with Maria and David, who created a private memorial to Anna and John, honoring their service while respecting the classified nature of their work. September 1st, 2020. Tony's Alzheimer's progressed to where he rarely recognizes me, but something remarkable happens when David plays Anna's Intelligence-era performances. Tony's eyes become alert, and he sometimes hums along with melodies he claims not to remember. It's as if his mother's courage and musical spirit are encoded in his DNA, accessible even when conscious memory fails. October 12, 2020. Professor Rodriguez completed her research and offered to help write the definitive biography of the Benedetto family's contributions to American intelligence. But Maria, David, and I agreed that some stories are too important to be told publicly. We decided to seal the documents for 50 years, ensuring Anna and John's heroism will eventually be recognized while protecting any living family members. November 30th, 2020. Tony passed away peacefully this morning, surrounded by people who understood how much he had been protected throughout his life. Maria held his hand and David sang softly. In his final moments, Tony seemed to recognize something in their voices, not their identities, but genetic echoes of his mother's courage and father's strength. December 25th, 2020. On Christmas Day, I found one last entry Tony had written himself during a brief moment of clarity. In his shaky handwriting, I don't remember the details, but I know I am loved by extraordinary people who did extraordinary things. If my music brought joy to the world, it was because it was built on love, sacrifice, and courage that I was privileged to inherit. I hope I honored their legacy. It was the last thing Tony ever wrote. The memory book now sits in a safety deposit box, waiting for the day when its secrets can be safely revealed. Susan visits Tony's grave every week, sometimes bringing Maria and David, sometimes coming alone to share new discoveries about the family's remarkable history. Tony Bennett's voice brought comfort to millions around the world, but the memory book reveals that his greatest performance was simply living a life worthy of the sacrifices made by parents who loved him enough to die, for the freedom that allowed his music to flourish. The songs he sang were love letters to a country protected by his family's blood and tears. The memory book had revealed not just what Tony had forgotten, but what America itself had forgotten. That freedom is protected by ordinary people willing to risk everything for ideals larger than themselves. Anna and John Benedetto had given their lives to ensure their son could grow up where artistic expression was possible, and Tony Bennett had spent his career unknowingly honoring that sacrifice with every note. In the end, the memory book became more than a record of forgotten memories. It became a testament to hidden heroes whose sacrifices make art, love, and freedom possible for future generations.